So Davidson paired up with a fellow named John Kabat-Zinn, who has made mindfulness, as he calls it, very popular, for example, in the medical sector as a way to manage chronic conditions. And also, in the States, at least in business recently, a lot of businesses are bringing it in. And it's more or less what we just did. Davidson and Kabat-Zinn went to a biotech startup, a 24/7, high-pressure environment, and they taught people how to do mindfulness, which is more or less the exercise of watching the breath. But they did it 30 minutes a day for 8 weeks. What he found was that before that, people's brains were tilted to the right. They're pretty hassled and stressed. After 8 weeks, 30 minutes a day, they were tilting back toward the left. And what's very interesting is people spontaneously started saying, hey, I'm starting to enjoy my work again. I remember what I love about this job. In other words, the positive mood was really making a difference. There's one reason that businesses are bringing it in. I myself feel that it's not we adults who are most in need of paying attention to attention in this way. I think it's children, because childhood has changed. Childhood has changed as a side effect of this onslaught of the digital world into our personal universe. I was talking to an 8th grade teacher who was complaining about how kids now are texting in the States. I don't know about here. Texting has overcome phone calls among teenagers as a preferred way to connect. There are kids who will send 100 texts a day to their friends, and that's not unusual. She said, for 20 years, I've been teaching the same book to my 13-year-olds. It's Edith Hamilton's Mythology. And she said, in the last 2, 3, 4 years, my students are starting to say they're having trouble reading this. It's a little too hard. And she attributes it to a loss of ability to comprehend because of this constant distraction. I saw a kid, maybe 9 or 10 years old, riding a bicycle and texting while he was riding. Can you believe that? Luckily, it was in the country, on a country lane. The reason I'm worried about children is that the brain is the last organ of the body to become anatomically mature. It starts growing from birth, and it actually doesn't finish until the mid-20s. During that time, the principle of neuroplasticity is extremely important. Neuroplasticity says that repeated experiences shape the brain. Use it or lose it is another way of saying it. If a child has an experience, for example, of empathy and another experience of empathy, the circuitry for empathy grows. If a child has the experience of paying full attention and ignoring distractors, which is what we just did, the connectivity for that circuitry grows. And children need this in order for their brains to develop well. When we see a child grow and go through different phases of childhood, what we're seeing are the external signs of brain growth. And I think it's incumbent on us to help children shape their brains in the best way. I was in a classroom of 7-year-olds in Spanish Harlem in Manhattan. Spanish Harlem is a very impoverished place. The children there live in housing projects, and the projects are pretty dire. One child came to class, the teacher told me, and was a little shaken. He'd just seen somebody shot. And the teacher said, how many of you know someone who's been shot? Every hand went up. It's that kind of childhood. It's a very tough place. And I happened to be there to watch something called Breathing Buddies. Every day, this classroom, all the kids have a session where they go to their little cubbies and they get a favorite stuffed animal and they lie down on a rug on the floor. They put the animal on their belly and they watch it go up with the in-breath and down when they breathe out. And they count 1, 2, 3 on the in-breath, 1, 2, 3 on the out-breath. And they're doing exactly what we just did. They're strengthening the capacity, the mental muscle of attention. There's something else. There's a twofer here because the same circuitry also calms stormy emotions. The ability to manage emotions is inextricably linked with the ability to pay attention. And the teacher said, one day because of a scheduling problem, we had to skip this, and the class was chaotic. The class was chaotic. So it makes a huge difference for these kids. I've long been an advocate of what's called social emotional learning. Social emotional learning takes the emotional intelligence components, self-awareness, managing your inner life, empathy, handling relationships, and makes it part of the curriculum. Not in a way that takes away from academics, but in a way that enhances children's ability to handle themselves and their relationships. And children's relationships, if you're a parent, I don't need to tell you this, but from puberty on, before puberty, the most important relationships in a child's life are family. After puberty, forget family, it's other kids. And the melodramas of childhood, they didn't invite me to the party, whatever it means, capture attention. Those are emotional upsets. The more you can manage those upsets, the more attentional capacity you have to hear what the teacher is saying. One of the things they do in these classes, in these programs, I've seen this in New Haven in a neighborhood very similar to Spanish Harlem. There's a poster on the wall of every classroom. It's a stoplight, a traffic light, red light, yellow light, green light. It says, when you're upset, remember the stoplight. Red light, stop, calm down, and think before you act. Well, stop says you have a choice. Calm down means you can manage your inner turmoil. Think before you act is a very valuable lesson because it says you can't determine what emotions you're going to have. Our emotions come unbidden. But once you have them, you can stop and think what you're going to do. In fact, one definition of maturity is lengthening the gap between impulse and action. Yellow light, think of a range of things you could do and what the consequences might be. Green light, pick the best one and try it out. This is a lesson in what's called cognitive control. Some of you may know about the marshmallow test. It's a rather legendary study in psychology. 4-year-olds at Stanford University are brought into a room one by one, sat down at a small table, big juicy marshmallow put in front of them. The experimenter says to this 4-year-old, you can have the marshmallow now if you want, but if you don't eat it till I come back from running an errand, you can have 2 then. Then she leaves the room. This is a predicament that tries the soul of any 4-year-old, I assure you. I've seen video on it. Some of them will go up and sniff it as though it were dangerous and then jump back, and others go off and sing and dance to themselves in a corner to stay distracted. About a third of the kids can't stand it. They just grab it and gobble it down on the spot. And another third or so wait the endless 10, 12 minutes until the experimenter comes back and they get the 2 marshmallows. The payoff from the study came 14 years later when they're tracked down as they're about to go to university, and the 2 groups are compared, the ones who gobbled, the ones who waited. And it turns out the ones who waited get along much better with their peers. They're still able to delay gratification in pursuit of their goals, which is exactly what that's a test of. And this was a surprise. On the American University Entrance Exam, the SAT, which at that time had 1,600 total points, the kids who waited had a 210-point advantage over the kids who grabbed. This is really interesting because these are all children of parents at Stanford University. These are high IQ, high-achieving families. So what's going on? The difference seems to be that if you're not able to manage your impulse, and mind wandering is kind of a microcosm of that, then you're going to be more upset, you're going to be more emotional, you're not going to be able to pay attention to what the teacher is saying, so you can't learn as well. There was a study done just a few years ago in New Zealand. Every child in a city in New Zealand who was born over a course of a year, became part of the study. From ages 4 to 8, they were rigorously tested on cognitive control, many different measures, including the marshmallow type test. And then when they're in their 30s, they're tracked down again. And it turned out that cognitive control, the ability to keep your mind here or bring it back when it wanders, was a better predictor of financial success and health in the mid-30s than either IQ or the social economic status of the family you grew up in. It's a completely independent factor. In fact, the people who did the study argue that we should be teaching this ability to children in order to level the playing field. So this is becoming part of social-emotional learning. Social-emotional learning, though, also means being smart about your relationships. So here's something that happened in New Haven among 11-year-old boys. They're going to play what we call soccer. I think you erroneously call it football here, is that right? So these kids were three boys going to play soccer. The first kid is kind of pudgy, not very athletic. And the two kids behind him are very good at soccer, very athletic, and they're making sarcastic remarks to this first kid. And one of the other kids says to this first kid, the big sneer, "Oh, so you think you're going to play soccer?" And the pudgy kid stops, takes a deep breath as though to brace himself for the confrontation ahead. This could easily lead to a fight in this school. Turns around and says, "Yeah, I'm going to try to play soccer. I'm not very good at it. What I'm good at is art. Show me anything, I can draw it really well. But you're fantastic at soccer. Someday I'd like to be as good as you are." And at that, the other kid just melts, comes up, puts his arm around and says, "Oh, you're not so bad. Let me show you a thing or two." That was no accident. That is called a put-up. That boy learned it in his SEL. It's a way to handle put-downs, which is a very big problem in the early teen years. And it's just part of a wider curriculum which pays attention to what matters to kids, and attention needs to be part of that curriculum. And it's not just schools. You know, parents are the first coach in all of this. When you pick up a baby who's crying and soothe her, you're actually teaching her how to soothe herself. When you point out to a toddler, you know, when you did that, it made your friend feel bad, that's a lesson in empathy. So it's, you know, the lessons in attention, in emotional intelligence start very, very early in life. But I think we've got to get better at it. One reason is the kids are being exposed more and more to influences that aren't so great. I don't know if you know anyone, any youngster who likes video games and spends hours at them. Maybe it doesn't happen here in London, but it's a big problem worldwide. And the data on video games is rather mixed. For one thing, they actually do enhance some aspects of attention. If you're a kid who likes to play fighting games, you know, battle games, and you have to be constantly on the lookout for the enemy who might pop up and kill you, it's very good for enhancing vigilance. You could be a very good air traffic controller, for example. However, it also means that if a kid happens to bump you in the hallway, your first thought is that he has a grudge against you. You get a bias toward hostile attribution. So the video games that we have now are rather mixed, but there's a new generation coming along which is using findings from cognitive science. There's one called Tenacity that I had my 4 grandchildren play, ages 7 to 13 at the time. In Tenacity, you have an iPad. Every time you breathe out, you tap the screen. On the 5th out-breath, you tap it twice. If you do that, you get a visual reward, you know, flowers blooming in the desert. As you do it more and more, it gets harder and harder. So basically, what it's doing is training attention, but in a way that keeps the attention of kids the same way that all the other video games do.